Thank you so much, Your Honor. I'm very grateful and appreciate the kind introduction. And thank you to the Ogun State chapter for asking me and inviting me to come. I look forward to talking to everyone and sharing and also learning from you. I might confirm if I now have hosting rights so that I can start sharing. Thank you.
Can we check? Your audio is off.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet, ma.
Okay. And now?
It's coming up. Yes, we can see it. Just make it a full screen, a full slide.
Yes. That's Control F3, isn't it?
Just go to your slideshow on the menu. Slideshow on the menu. Slideshow on the menu. Slideshow. No. On this menu, after animation,
okay.
Yeah, click on it. Yeah, so the beginning.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. So our objectives today really, when I was preparing for this presentation, I thought to myself that the people that I'll be talking to are mostly people who are qualified corporate governance practitioners as well. So I didn't think there'll be any need to go into what is the meaning of corporate governance and things like that. So my presentation really will be focusing on the effects of compliance and non-compliance of the code, and what are the positive outcomes of compliance and the negative consequences that we've observed using examples that we're familiar with, and then legal implications that I've seen that has happened, financial repercussions and all. I wanted to also start with my own favorite quote on corporate governance, because the way I see corporate governance is, it's not, corporate governance should become like a way of life for us. It's not something that we should merely put in our articles of association and then leave it as that. Adi Godrej is a very popular Indian billionaire. Some of us know his product. I think his company makes Tura soap, amongst other things. He's very invested in FMCG, and he shared and said corporate governance should be more than just principles, but it should also be rules. Should be through principles rather, and not just rules. And I really like this, because if we just do it as per rules, then we'll see what would happen. Oftentimes, when we just do rules and just say we want to have a cosmetic treatment for corporate governance, oftentimes it blows up in our faces. And I wanted to share what I find to be a funny video just to highlight this part. So I will just show that video now. Stop this share. My screen?
Coming up.
Not yet, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to share this video and I'm going to speak over it. There are three people that I'd like us to pay attention to. The first woman who is in our screen here. There's a man who will come here to look at a stapler. And then there's somebody else who would come here also. So pay attention to those three people in the video and see what happens to them. Okay, so I shared that video because I wanted us to see, oops, sorry about that. Okay. I think your job is done. So I wanted to share that video just to highlight what happens when we do cosmetic compliance. As you see in that video, what they did was the first woman, she was supposed to bind together a lot of things. And what she did was she did bind them, but of course she didn't do a good job. And obviously it was not something that she thought was important to do. She relaxed and said, look, I've done the barest minimum, I've complied with the rule. The rule is bind all the documents, I've bound the documents, so I'm good. You'd also see the other man also who obviously knew that the stapler he was using wasn't very good, but didn't think that, you know, he should do the right thing and get proper equipment. You'd also see the one that was completely lackadaisical about it. He opened the drawer and he left it open and he injured someone. And oftentimes this is what happens sometimes in corporate governance. We comply with the rules just because we want to tick boxes, but that's not the essence of corporate governance. And those things can sometimes lead to losses, as we'll see, and as we already know from some of the things that have happened in the past. So what are the core principles really that are universal? Because as we know, our corporate governance principles also adhere to international best practices. And there are four really: accountability, fairness, transparency, and integrity. Those four core principles are principles that govern not just organizations, but also in government, because I know that some of us are also work with institutions and not only companies, whether public or private. So those are the four core principles really that if we adhere to, oftentimes it makes it easy to navigate corporate governance. It makes it easy for us to simply report the things that we're doing. It makes it easier. And so what are the key elements from our own corporate governance? Now speaking to the topic that has been given to me, which is the core elements of corporate governance. It's accountability and transparency, like the principle we mentioned earlier, shareholder rights. Again, I'm not delving into it because I believe we're corporate governance practitioners, and not all of us require for us to go down and do the nitty-gritty. What does it mean? What does the law say? So, but it's enshrining accountability and transparency into procedure. Our board reporting, when we report, we have to be transparent. Shareholder dealings, insider dealings, I know. But when we do, for example, if you work in a bank and you have to give out loans, for example, to directors, is it reported? The remuneration policy of the organization for managers, because that's what the code now requires, not just directors, even for managers, do we report it transparently? Or do we still have two sets of accounts, as used to be in most organizations in the past, where you have an account that the directors see and a different one that is filed? And if we truly follow corporate governance, we would have only one set of accounts that is verifiable anywhere. Are shareholder rights protected, especially the minority shareholders? And we put the stakeholder interests. And by stakeholder interests, really, we're talking about your employees, your contractors, and how well do we treat employees? You remember just this year, there was a Twitter trend on horrible bosses. And people called out names of their bosses. Some even shared links to the Twitter handles of those bosses. And it was such a nightmare for a lot of organizations trying to mop out all of this. So your employees, how well are they treated? Do they have, are they well treated? Do they speak well of your organization? Those are things that we must concern ourselves with as corporate governance practitioners. Our board structure and responsibilities, risk management, disclosures, whistleblowing, and ESG. So, I mean, corporate governance has become so important. Of course, it ensures accountability and transparency, but it also does more than that. It helps to inspire investor confidence. If you've been following the trend, you've noticed that more and more now, we have more people investing in Nigerian companies, and we had, and that obviously is, a lot of these organizations are now beginning to realize that from the foundation, they must now put good corporate governance principles and processes in place. Without these processes and principles, nobody would give you millions of dollars. I mean, we're talking, let me go to that slide. We're talking millions. So number, I don't know if anyone knows this organization called Number. And all of this, I deliberately picked these organizations because all of these organizations are organizations that got funding in 2003. So all the figures I'm calling are 2023 rather, as recent as June. Some of them happened in the year, but then the 2020, the first one there provide for small and medium scale enterprises. That's what their focus and their strength in. On the 4th of May, 2023, they announced that they received $30 million, not Naira, $30 million of funding. And the only reason why, one of the reasons why I loved this particular story, and in fact, all of them, is the different aspects of corporate governance that the investor specifically mentioned in the press statement. If you're with your computer or your phones, you can Google them and invested about these people. For Number, what the investor was excited about was that they had good accountability in place, which is one of the core principles that we mentioned earlier for corporate governance. For Hall 247, they're a logistics organization, and they're a small organization. They started about 4 or 5 years ago, and they received $3 million this year also in funding. What the investor was excited about was that they were focused and they had transparent policies with their customers and their clients, which again comes back to stakeholder management. How are you working with your stakeholders? So accountability and transparency is not just to our regulators, it's to everybody. And as they say, accountability in itself is the right to know. Transparency is the right to know. Accountability is the right to be involved. So how are you involving them? How well do they know your processes? Not that they get shocked at some point that there's something in the contract, as sometimes we lawyers do. I know not everybody is a lawyer, but just saying. So the age and the era of talking silent clauses that can put people in trouble is over. People now reward accountable practices, transparent practices, and that's what helped Hall 247 when they were going out seeking funding, and they were rewarded with $3 million as funding. Taylor is founded by a very young Nigerian lady. And when she started Taylor, she just practically finished school and said she didn't even have any plans at the time of starting an organization, but she eventually went into it when she saw the need. And they provide furniture. She's an architect herself, and they provide furniture. And they do something interesting. They include innovation. So when you want to buy their furniture pieces, if you have any kind of AR available to you, you can log on to their website, the portal there where you can log on to that or their app, and you can connect. Once you connect, you can actually see the pieces you want, pick it, and visualize what it will look like in your living room. Yes. This is designed by a Nigerian young lady, and she recently got, I think she got about 5 million or something in $5 million, by the way. This particular investor, and part of the reasons why they did it is because she had very good diversity, both on the board and also because she herself is it's a female-led business. So again, we see diversity at play. We see another principle of corporate governance at play in the decisions that are made by investors in which company to invest in. The last company is Figure. On the screen is Figure. Figure uses the Internet of Things to do cold chain technology. So they can help you freeze the things that you need to freeze. And they're like a mobile cold storeroom for farmers and for people in agri and anyone who needs that kind of technology. And they, on the 18th of May, 2023, received $1.5 million. And part of what the investors said they were excited about was innovation. So just highlighting examples of the benefits of corporate governance and how it comes to play when we're looking and seeking for funding. And not many Nigerian investors that I know or that I'm aware of give millions of dollars. I know there's the Tony Elumelu Foundation. I don't know if they give millions of dollars. I'm not sure. I stand to be corrected. And even if he does, he's probably the only Nigerian businessman. So in essence, all organizations at the moment were competing. As you can imagine, the investors that have invested in these organizations receive lots of applications all of the time. And they receive global applications because they're all venture capitalists. And as you can imagine, with all of those people picking out these particular organizations, even though they are small companies, tell us something about corporate governance and how it gives an edge when we're talking to investors, especially investors outside of Nigeria. And we're all right now, with the way the internet is, competing internationally. And so looking at what happens when we don't comply with corporate governance practices, and especially the code, it can lead to reputational damage. I mentioned earlier about the hashtag horrible bosses that was trending on Twitter, and how, you know, it sent shivers down a lot of spines of CEOs. Some of them, I think quite a number of them were in the fintech space, and quite a number of them were called out. I know a particular organization. I didn't find enough information, so I won't mention the name of that organization. And just because we're recording this, I'd like to mention ahead that all of the illustration that I'm giving is not to pass judgment to any of these companies. I'm not saying that number, figure, hall, I'm not saying that they are excellent, top-rated companies. I'm just saying that these are the considerations that the investors looked at. Neither am I saying for the ones that I'm going to highlight as for the consequences, negative consequences of corporate governance, neither am I giving them a knock and saying that they're horrible and they're bad organizations, but we're using them as examples of what we've done, and hopefully none of our organizations, nobody here would have their organization mentioned. So reputational risk is a huge risk when we don't comply with corporate governance. Financial performance oftentimes is affected when we don't comply with corporate governance principles, and shareholder trust is often affected. And of course, it could lead to the collapse of the company. In some influential organizations, when that organization collapses, it also has a ripple effect on the economy. So it's more like the corporate governance, more like the Ubuntu principle that the South Africans call and mention all of the time. You because I am, and I am because you are. So a lot of the things that we do come back eventually to hurt not just the organization, but also us in the long run. Impacts oftentimes spiral. You know, for example, somebody loses his job. If he's the breadwinner of the organization, it means that the lives of the children might be affected. The children, if they're not able to go to school, would have to go into hard labor. God forbid. I'm just painting scenarios of what can happen in situations like that. And they can't go to school anymore, go into hard labor, child labor practices because they want to support the family.
Sorry, Ma, you stopped.
And then, God forbid.
Sorry, Ma, you stopped the sharing. The slide is not showing anymore.
Really?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh my goodness. I wish you told me. Where's the last one you saw? Sorry. Can you see it now?
It's coming up.
Hello? Can you see it now?
Not yet showing, ma'am.
Oh my. I'm so sorry about that. Oh, I see someone saying that from the beginning.
Ma, you can continue from where you stopped, since we're still going to share the slides for the participants. Thank you.
But can you see my screen now? Can you see the slides
Yes,
now?
yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so these are the organizations that I mentioned: Number, Hall 247, Taylor, and Figo. And then I was talking on this slide, I was talking about reputational risk, financial performance, shareholder trust, and the negative consequences sometimes include legal and financial consequences as well. So, 1 minute. I'd like to show a video, another video about Silicon Valley Bank. This video, very interesting story. Just to give a bit of a background about this bank. So this bank, Silicon Valley Bank, started 4 decades ago. 4 decades ago. And when the bank started, it seemed to be doing so well. However, in a space of only 48 hours, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. As at March 10th, Silicon Valley was still celebrating on Twitter that it was nominated again by the Financial Times as one of the best banks in corporate America. And then by March, I think March 16th or 18th, Silicon Valley Bank had collapsed in just 48 hours. Oh, March 10th, I think, that's when it collapsed. This bank's collapse has been recorded as the biggest failure since the 2007 bank collapse. And this bank used to be capitalized at about $202 billion, not million, $2 billion. However, as at today, that bank ceases to exist. 4 decades in 48 hours, all gone. And why did this happen? It was a series of decisions that this bank had taken over the years and over months that was accumulating. So it was small decisions that they kept taking, they kept ignoring. For example, their chief risk officer, at some point, we don't know what happened, stepped down from the bank. And for over a year, they did not hire any other chief risk officer. Instead, they kept on working as they did. And this bank, this is a bank who also has, they have offices and operations in the UK. They have offices and operations in the UK, in Europe, apart from UK, in China as well. They've once been rated the 16th largest bank in the US. And yet, because of poor corporate governance issues, they fell. And what were the issues? They had, this is a bank that had clients like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they were located in Silicon Valley, which was one of the reasons why a lot of people just went to them. They also had developed a niche for themselves. They had crafted this niche to be the bank to go for tech and innovation companies, because as you can imagine, a lot of the things they do, not a lot of people understand it. So the traditional banks couldn't quite cope. So they were in a niche market. There was no reason why Silicon Valley should have collapsed, but it did. Why? They took their eye off corporate governance issues. They started to invest. So what happens with most banks, and as people who work in banks here, please feel free to contribute in the comment section. So they get money from depositors, their clients or their customers bring money into the bank. What a lot of banks do is they then reinvest that money. They reinvest that money into bonds and into things, short-term bonds, sometimes long-term, oftentimes something with good security, but something that they might be able to quickly recall. But Silicon Valley wasn't really doing that. What they were doing was investing in long-term bonds. Why? They got more and they invested more in government bonds because they were able to get more returns from that. So they were also able to pay a lot of interest, which is good when the going is good. You know, when the going is good, everybody's your friend. There are not many people who will say, oh, why are you doing this and all that. Everybody hails you. So they invested a lot in that. It was a risky thing to do, but they had done it for a number of years and they didn't think there was anything wrong with it. They started I think 2020, when there was this huge rush of people had most of these fintech companies and technology companies had a huge rush of money. Why? Everybody couldn't do anything without the tech companies. Zoom became richer during the tech times, during COVID times. So many other tech organizations became huge and big, content organization, content companies, and small content creators. You know, everybody was rushing to this bank. Why? Now they had money with them. And this was the bank for tech and innovation crew. So everybody rushed and they took the money also. And rather than invest in safe stocks, invested in government bonds so that they made more money. Now, unfortunately, inflation began to rise in the US. If they probably had a risk officer or they had a board that was paying attention to the times and what was going on in the economy, they probably would have slowed down. Again, the board wasn't so interested in what management was doing in the Silicon Valley case. So when the government started to increase the rates and tighten its belts, their interest started to drop. And then because the interest started to drop, a lot more people, and because of inflation, a lot more people needed money and more people started to collect their money. Eventually, they made another grave mistake. They announced to everybody, not calling their biggest clients or investors first, but they announced to everybody that they now needed to sell off a lot of their stocks and they knew they were going to sell at a loss. As you can imagine, it created a huge panic, you know, and everybody wanted to collect their money at once. And in 48 hours, Silicon Valley was gone. I would share that slide. I wanted to just talk about that. You know, there was a lack of oversight on their side. You know, they didn't have their risk governance processes in place. And that's really what led to the collapse of Silicon Valley. I'll just share it very briefly. We're not looking at the entire video, just one or two of the videos. So this is an interview that was done by a particular organization, Sky News Australia, and they were asking someone, an expert, on his opinion as to what happened with Silicon Valley. Take a listen.
Let's get straight back into it. I'm joined now by former Australian Ambassador to Washington,
Can you hear it,
Joe
please?
Hockey, now.
Yes, ma'am.
Founder and Global Chair of Bondi Partners. Great to have you with me tonight, Mr. Hockey. Look, I want to start with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. Of course, everyone will remember that you're the former Federal Treasurer of Australia. You're well across these issues. How nervous is Wall Street about a banking crisis?
Well, I don't think it's as nervous as some would think because, Shari, this was an unusual bank. It took deposits from a lot of Silicon Valley companies, and rather than lending the money out, it went and invested that money in mortgage-backed securities and some other securities, creating a mismatch between the money they were holding and paying interest on and the money that they were investing. And as soon as interest rates rose, that mismatch came into play and the bank collapsed.
There are concerns, though,
Poor governance.
Yes, poor governance, but there are concerns that high interest rates, of course, contributed to this, because as the interest rates rose, the bonds' value fell, if you like, and they were forced to sell those US Treasury bonds at a much lower rate than they bought them. Do you think there are concerns that we might see similar issues in Australia, not with banks, which are highly regulated, but with other managed funds where there is less oversight?
Well, there is some risk, but APRA's doing a good job supervising a lot of the funds in Australia. And there's been a lot of consolidation of funds over the last few years. So I don't see a great risk here in Australia at all. Again, this was just poor governance in a bank that took deposits, didn't lend money, and instead of lending money and taking mortgages over people's homes and so on, it went and invested the money in bad investments that gave them no room to move when interest rates inevitably were going to rise.
Yeah, and long-term deposits, and they underestimated how quickly the founders would want access to their own money to grow their business, to grow their startups. Yeah.
To meet payroll.
Yeah, well,
to meet payroll, that's what startups do. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
So there you have it. That's the main gist of Silicon Valley and what happened to Silicon Valley. It was quite a shock. The effect of Silicon Valley's collapse went round the world, so to speak. As you know, most of the finances around the world come from the big the developed companies and developed world, countries. So of course, we had protests also in the UK. A lot of companies in the UK collapsed. A lot of people lost their jobs, all because a small group of people did not take the right decisions. So the decisions that we take in the boardroom, the decisions that we take every day as governance practitioners end up affecting the lives of many more people. I mean, so many organizations lost money and of course had to lay off employees. And of course, it came back again to government to try and see how they could rescue some of these organizations. As you heard in the video, another bank that was heavily leveraged on Silicon Valley also collapsed as a result of the poor governance and poor decision-making of some of these small group of men and women that sat in the boardroom and ignored all the right things to do. I'm going to go on now to another organization, but I won't share a video anymore for this particular one. So we'll just go on straight. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. So this is an organization that a lot of us know. First Bank has been in existence since 1894. Again, caveat, this is not a knock on First Bank. All the information that I'm sharing are information that is available to all of us and available in public. So First Bank, established in 1894, established by a family, had corporate governance in place and moved on and started to operate. Of course, lots of changes along the line in the bank. And to the shock of everybody's and our amazement, on the 29th of April, 2021, the CBN governor came on air and televised live that he was going to they had to take a decision to sack the board of First Bank. even mentioning the names of directors, including the board chair at the time, a very well-respected board chair, who also happened to be an independent non-executive director. Now, you would think that if we have independent non-executive directors, it should suffice and that should be enough. But again, going back to the first video that we started with, it's not enough to just comply and follow the rules. It goes back to the first quotes that I mentioned. What is critical is that we're not just complying to tick the boxes, but we're complying because it has become our ethos. It has become our way of life. It has become what we believe in. It's not just rules, but it's the principles that we hold dear. So in this case, the CBN alleged that they have corporate governance issues with First Bank, and that was why they were sacking. That's why CBN was going to sack all of the board directors. And CBN said there was non-perfection of insider loans as part of the allegations, and there was a failure to structure credit facilities granted to insiders. They sacked the MD, the board sacked the MD without proper process. And so it then seemed like, it was very clear. I mean, the MD was not given, according to CBN, was not given proper hearing, fair hearing. CBN itself was not notified. So there was, of course, regulatory compliance in that case, and that this MD was going to be removed. Of course, we've heard a lot of stories about, the politics that goes on, but beyond that, what CBN had said, even though the board chair at the time also came out and issued a statement, but some of these allegations were not taken care of and were not mentioned in the board chair's statement. So there were allegations that perhaps, the independence of the directors was now no longer independent. The independent directors were no longer as independent as they ought to have been to have allowed all of this. Effect was, affected the organization, affected First Bank. Their shares plummeted in 2021. Fitch ratings, which a lot of banks rely on to inspire investor confidence, dropped to B-. And in Fitch ratings words, as I found on their website, they did this because the ratings now primarily reflect corporate governance weaknesses highlighted by the CBN in April 2021. So investor confidence was affected. Shareholders, of course, were affected. There was a shakeup, as we all know and heard later. The board also was affected. So there was also the reputational question marks on some of these directors as well. CBN did not fine First Bank apart from this. So we really don't know what happened, but from just what we read and what we saw, these are the reasons that were given, and these are the things that became obvious. Thankfully, First Bank moved beyond this, corrected itself, realigned itself back to being the corporate governance guru that they are known for. And by September 2021, a little over a year later, they announced, the board MD announced that profit before tax for First Bank grew to 40%, an increase from what it was before. And profit after tax also grew by 42.3%. They had revamped their risk management architecture, and their Fitch rating was also revised. I was excited to see that also was revised and reflected, and they're now back to B ratings. And of course, they now have improved asset quality since their impaired loans had been repaid. And these are all the things that the board MD said in their in the last press release that he gave. So this is an example of a company that suffered poor corporate governance, but realigned itself And we can see immediately the effect of poor corporate governance practices initially, what it did to the company, what it did to the bank. And we see that taking steps also helped the bank to realign itself, and also then became something that became even more profitable for them, because 40% is a lot more than they had posted in about 5 years. So that was good of them. Again, to highlight the importance of corporate governance, what can go wrong, and that because it has gone wrong, if the organization is lucky to not fall into a Silicon Valley situation where it collapsed before it had the chance to steer itself back to the right course. If the organization is lucky that doesn't happen, then if they only steer themselves in the right course, then of course it can go beyond those operational issues and then even move on to profitability, as seen from First Bank. And also wanted to highlight what can happen with reputational risk. Sorry. This is another issue. I intentionally didn't use the faces of the people involved because I'm sure we're tired of seeing it. Twitter was agog in January 2022 over this issue. I think the story first broke either January 1st or January 2nd of 2022 of the former MD of FCMB who was involved in a paternity scandal. The bank took the position that this was a private matter and had nothing to do with the bank. So this was not something the bank should be saying anything about. The person complaining was complaining on behalf of a friend and his wife, who was a former employee, and their MD. And really, you would think that this really should be something settled between them, not something that you should drag an organization into. But corporate governance has now moved beyond just the regulator. Our stakeholders are now every single person on the street. Over 10,000 signatures were gathered in a space of a month, just 1 month, alleging gross misconduct based on ethical grounds against that former MD of First City Monument Bank. And of course, you know what then happened? Eventually, he had to resign. An investigation was conducted because the Twitter thread just wouldn't die. Usually, you know what happens with Twitter threads, within 24 to 48 hours, that issue would die down and we wouldn't hear anything of it. But somehow, this particular case was sustained for over a week. It was unprecedented. And so, of course, FCMB had to succumb to that pressure, and they had to probe, and they had to ask the MD what we hear is that the MD voluntarily decided to step down. And so he had to resign from his position. He lost such a lofty position because of something that somebody brought. So we're held accountable, not just by regulators, not just by our clients, but everybody and everybody around the world. You remember the EndSARS issue. It started with 1 or 2 policemen, but the youth decided that every policeman had to be held accountable, and the government itself had to be held accountable. And so, of course, the government, my condolences, Olubukola, on that. And so, of course, they decided the government had to be held accountable. They were tired of it, and they forced the government to disband SARS and even demanded more things. We know how that ended. But just to say that, you know what? Now, corporate governance is not a matter for just your board. Everything you do is online. One employee can record, I know I don't want to mention the name of the organization, but we will all recall that a particular company secretary had to step down from her role because somebody recorded her calling another employee names in the fit of anger. Now, we don't know what provoked her, and put her in that position where she got so upset that she was calling that person names. But that video leaked. It went on Twitter. And once it did, the organization quickly distanced itself from the company secretary and said, this is not what we do here. We have zero tolerance to harassment and bullying, because that's what people said. She was mentioned as one of the horrible bosses, and she had to resign her position. If you know who the person is, please don't put the person's name. This is not a name and shame. It's part of what we do just to encourage ourselves and to learn of what can happen with corporate governance. And so, of course, the company said, we have strong harassment policies in place, anti-harassment policies in place. We don't tolerate this at all. And in less than a month, investigation was concluded and completed, and the company secretary had to step down. Again, that's another person that lost a position because of corporate governance issues. So corporate governance is no longer something. And again, for those who remember this issue, you can imagine how difficult it will be for this particular company secretary to find another job. Not that it's impossible, of course, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that that issue would always be something she would always have to answer for every time she goes out to a place where people have the right to ask her about that issue. So corporate governance has now gone beyond just what we do in our offices. It's now something that everybody out there watches us about around the world. So it is now something that we must pay attention to. We can no longer ignore corporate governance. And the trends now that we see is ESG, as you see from the Harvard article and the PwC article that I've mentioned here. Human capital concerns are now going to be a huge trend now. And of course, this I'm sure doesn't come as a surprise to any one of us here. With the Japa syndrome going on, you will have to think again about, your human capital, the people that work with you. How are staff treated? How do they feel about the organization? When they leave the organization, do they leave on a good term? With the way there's this fluidity of movements, and sometimes you don't even get very good time frame of resignation. You hear, oh, I'm very sorry, I'm willing to pay the 1 month in lieu of notice. When you begin to see things like that, you know that it's something that we now have to think about more carefully. And people are not willing now to work for organizations that don't treat their staff well. And there are more people on their way out than there are people on their way in. So retaining human capital, retaining talent is now a big issue for organizations. If your organization is not going through that, you're one of the very, 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 very few 1% that is very lucky to not be going through that now. I think it's affecting everybody, especially with the younger people. So succession planning is another thing that we now have to think about when we talk about human capital. Is also one of the huge things for corporate governance. And of course, the risk that come with that are things that risk management makes risk management a very big deal right now, especially for us here in Nigeria. You're talking your data concerns. How is the information of the organization being treated? How is it being taken? Is it being taken away? Can it be easily taken away? Can you track your documents? Can you track your information? Who is with it? What are they doing with it? Especially when you don't even know whether that person will still work with you by August of 2023. So data privacy with the fines that we've seen across the world, Google, Facebook, recent fines, and also the ones that have happened here in Nigeria, data privacy. And as we all know, there's a new data privacy law that's just 2023, I think was last month, that the government has now assented to and has now become an act and is enforceable. So again, that's one thing that we want to put on the front burner when we're looking at corporate governance. Board effectiveness has now become really, really big. ESG, especially equity, diversity, inclusiveness, has now become a huge, huge issue around the world. Just before I think it was just before COVID, we had the George Floyd issue that reverberated around the world, and there were protests around the world, Black Lives Matters, and many organizations had to change the way that they work and had to carefully think about it. It's not enough anymore. That's the trend that we're seeing. It's not enough anymore to just come out and say, oh, we support women, we have one woman on our board. People want to see that you're doing more. How are you bringing the women through the pipeline? How are you encouraging the younger people also? What opportunities are you giving to them? And now in the days of the internet, it's very easy for people to find out what your company is about and how you work. Now, what happens in the case that you work for an organization that is a one-man organization? As a corporate governance organization, professional, I do not believe that that's the end of it. And because the organization is not an organization that has a board, that there's nothing else that you can do for corporate governance. So here are my suggestions of what you can do if you work for a small organization. And we know that Nigeria is led by a lot of SMEs, and the economy of Nigeria is held primarily by SMEs, and not all of them have boards. So if you work in an organization, or you yourself run an organization and you have no board, what can you do to enshrine corporate governance? As we've said, how important it is, what can happen, how you can win investors, how this reputational risk, compliance, fines, we've mentioned all of that. So how do you put corporate governance as part of the foundation of the organization? My suggestions. Your stakeholder management starts with that. Your employees, define their roles and define your own role as well, as MD or as CEO, whatever nomenclature you choose to call yourself. Define that role clearly and ensure that it's clear to everybody. You don't take decisions on marketing, you don't take decisions on accounting. If you work for such an organization, it's one of the things you can discuss with your boss to say, let's have a clear separation of roles when it comes to that. Decision-making should be clear. Who is making this decision regarding what? Clear reporting lines. Have a code of conduct that the organization and all employees are bound by. And by all employees, it also means Oga's sister, Oga's brother, Oga's uncle, nephew, all the family members that work. Everybody must be bound by it, and the organization must commit to that. Have internal control systems and regular internal audits. Even also have do development trainings, but even also have external auditors come from time to time to look at what the organization is doing. For customers, what you can do as corporate governance is to ensure that you're looking at your customers regularly. So have regular reviews. Make sure you're documenting the process by which you're talking to customers and you're attending to customers. This helps, for example, if somebody leaves the organization suddenly, you have something in place, so that you're not left not knowing how to fill in the gap before you employ. At least this process has been documented and we know what to do. For the community that you work with, be diligent and respect the organization and be transparent in your dealings with them. If it's an organization that could possibly pollute the organization, say you own a restaurant, for example, be sure that you're diligent in the way that you're disposing of those things. Don't just let your employees or co-workers dump those things anyhow into the environment. And continually improve what you do and have regular engagement with your vendors and with the community, and always send feedback when they talk, and in your decision making be transparent. If it's an organization that has regulators, of course, ensure that you have compliance in place and constantly read to see what's going on. Silicon Valley, one of the things that obviously came out from this is they were not reading the economy, they were not reading what was going on, and they just continued life as usual. Every day came to work. even got paid a bonus a few days before Silicon Valley Bank went down, because they just were not paying attention to the environment, the regulators, and the changes that were happening in the economy. So you want to be paying attention to that. If it's a family-owned business and it's not a sole-owned proprietor, what things can we do? Have specific roles assigned. For example, it's owned by a brother and a sister, or it's owned by two cousins, for example, or even husband and wife. Have specific roles assigned to each person based not on you can do it, but based on their skills and their qualifications. Differentiate ownership from management roles. Don't be the same one taking all the decisions and then expected of the corporate governance. It won't work. So when empower employees to be able to take the decisions that they can take in their space, and of course advise that. You can have a family council where you decide what the strategies and how the business would go, or an advisory board comprising of family members. If you don't want to have a board immediately, or if your boss decides that, look, I don't want to have a board of directors for whatever the reasons are, well, you can advise them to have people that they know that are qualified in different areas and have different relevant skills to come together from time to time, help them review what they're doing. At least those people are people that they trust and they can listen to. Might be all shoulders and say, this might not be the best decision to take. And hire professionals. They could decide that they want to hire, for example, an audit firm, so that they're not the only ones looking over the books. And then they can have people who are accountable to them to say, okay, ownership to this and bought 10 cars, affecting operational performance, or finances and all that. So you can also advise them to hire professional managers to bring in their expertise or fresh ideas. They can also have a family constitution for going forward, for how they take care of succession planning and things like that. It's crucial that accounting records are in place. No investor is going to pump money into an organization that they don't know how they deal with money. If every time money comes in, Oga or Madam buys a Range Rover, of course, as you can imagine, it will be extremely difficult to ask an investor to come in when you can't explain those things. So when you have proper accounting records, it helps. And the time to have the accounting records is not when you're looking for an investor, it's from now, because people want to see that it's a practice, a principle that you work with, not something hastily put together because you are approaching them. And then, of course, perhaps an external board of advisors. Okay. So this is what I've found some of these organizations do. Dangote Group, what we heard is that they have a family, what they call a family assembly, where they discuss issues and they hold it like a proper board meeting, and it's working for them. And that's to manage, as you know, they've divested quite a bit of their shareholding, even though I think Dangote himself is still the largest shareholder in in Dangote Group itself. So, but they have this assembly that is formally constituted that guides how they operate the family's interest within each of the companies within the group. And First Bank, of course, we know that they've since moved on from being a family-owned business and has now become a PLC. Succession is no longer family members and all. Well, shareholder agreements, Owando, if we recall, several years back, excuse me, several years back, Owando had corporate governance issues as well. they've dealt with that. They now have good shareholder agreements in place. They had series of shareholder litigation. I think they probably had about 6 or so different matters in court at a point, but that has now been sorted out. They now have shareholder agreements in place that also helps to take care of minority shareholders as well. Elizabeth Group, they're not a PLC, but they're very, very strong on financial reporting and external audits. So that's another thing that you might want to look at also. I hear the House of Ojuku, I read somewhere that they also do similar to Dangote Group. They have a family council and constitution. Ibeto has an external advisory board. Then they don't work every day within the organization, and that's the difference. They're not the regular board that are, whether independent or not, that are regular people that sit, but they're people that they call in from time to time, and they make up the external advisory board. And then, of course, in due course, you might want to advise ownership to think about establishing a board, like Flour Mills have done. They moved from being a family-owned business to now having a very strong board with even more independent directors than non-executive directors. So that's something that can be planned for in future. So let's do a health check. We've talked about organizations, what you can do in your organization to put in corporate governance. We've talked about the advantages of having corporate governance, the benefits. You had all the millions and millions of dollars and dollars, not Naira, let me say it again, it was not Naira, it was millions of dollars that small organizations, even young people, are attracting because of corporate governance. And we've talked about organizations that are sole proprietorship. What can you do? We've talked about if it's a family-owned business, what can you do? We've talked about if you have a board, what should you be doing? So let's do a health check in your organization. We're not submitting it, but please take a piece of paper if you would indulge me. I'm going to be showing a set of 10 questions. I want you to rate your organization and think about it. If you have the things that are projected, you can put a great, we're doing so well. And please don't put a great if you don't monitor and measure. You can only score your organization a 5 if you measure. What is not measured, you can't, excuse me, if you don't monitor it, if you don't measure it, if you don't report on it, don't score your organization a 5. And be honest, I'm not looking, nobody's looking, it's you and yourself by yourself. But if you know you have policies in place and there's adherence at least to some level, but you don't report, you don't measure, just give yourself a 4. If it's something that you know that there are plans to start those things, score a 3. If you are not doing anything about it for now, you can score yourself a 2. And if it's something that doesn't apply to your organization, score yourself a 1. So here are the questions. First one, do you have a board of directors? Are there independent directors? Is your board all male or all female? Are they all lawyers? Do you have diversity in place? So score yourself a 1, 2, 3, or 4. What mechanisms do you have in place for risk management? Is it something that is reported during board meetings? If you don't have a board, is it something that you record? Do you see, oh, government has now canceled telecommunication tax. What can that mean for us? Could that mean cost savings or could it mean more money? Government has said, and Tinubu announced fuel. What could that mean for us? Could it mean that we need to pay people more? So do you have risk mechanisms in place? Do you have somebody who is overseeing it, even if it's not a chief risk officer? Do you have internal control in place? For example, is the CEO different from the accountant? Or is the CEO the same as the accountant? How do you identify risk? Score yourself 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then how transparent is the organization's disclosure, even if you don't file to a regulator, if it's not a regulated industry? Do you have 2 sets of reports? And if you have a regulator, are there gaps or delays in your reports? Number 4, how does your organization protect shareholder rights? This is for organizations that have shareholders. And then are there mechanisms in place for shareholder engagements? How do your employees participate in decision-making? Is it just Oga said and that's it? Nobody can question, they all be it. 5, your organization's compliance with relevant laws. How are you doing in that area? Then number 6, do you have mechanisms in place for conflicts of interest among directors? There's a situation that I once heard about. A particular organization was founded by a man who had 2 wives. And while he was alive, both his sons were directors in the company. Unfortunately, he died intestate. And when he died intestate, it also began amongst them. Why? Because the oldest son was the son of the second wife. The younger son was the son of the first wife. The oldest son felt he's the older one and should naturally take their father's place as the MD. As you can imagine, being Nigerians, hopefully there are no foreigners amongst us, right? As you can imagine, the younger son said, my mother struggled with my father before your mother came on board. No way on earth am I letting you be MD. We can't have 2 MDs, so what do we do? This is why issues of conflict is important. What mechanisms do you have in place? Are there ethical standards and culture of integrity? Does your organization monitor and evaluate the performance of boards and board committees? Are your independent directors truly independent, or have they worked with you for so long that they are no longer independent? Do you need to review that? Then what mechanisms do you have in place for whistleblowing? Is it possible to say something is going wrong and say it without repercussion? And then how does your organization handle executive compensation? Okay, hopefully everybody's answered the questions by yourselves. I'm leaving you with that. I'd like you to review what your organization scored, and please take action today and think about what you can do to improve the corporate governance in your organization. There's no point being an ACIS, FCIS, if there's no changes in your organization. The reason why we bear this title so proudly is because everywhere we go, there's that respect. And the only reason why ICSAN will continue to have respect in society is if all of us are making changes, positive changes in our organization, so much so that we become, sought after. So think about some of the things that we've shared today and some of the things that please feel free to share. And yes, please take action today. You don't have to do everything all at once, but take baby steps and take baby steps every day. And with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. And just to remind you that when we have strong corporate governance, it's not only a legal requirement, but it's a crucial one in building sustainable organizations that would benefit all stakeholders, including Nigeria. When your organizations are strong and they're doing well, we have more jobs. More jobs mean we can pay more taxes, meaning that Nigeria can begin to grow out of this recession that it's in. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of the work that you do every day and for listening to me rat on and on and on. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, either in the chat or if the administrator would let you unmute. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Your Honor, you're muted, ma. I see you're still talking, ma, but we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute myself. Can you hear now?
Yes, ma.
Yes,
ma, we can.
Yes, I said I would like to say a very big thank you to the facilitator for doing a very thorough and good job. We thank you so much. You've told us so much about the consequences and effect of non-compliance to corporate governance. We know of the risk involved, we know of the criminal liability involved, and so many others. So in the next couple of minutes, we'd like to take questions from the participants. I'm sure we all heard and understood what she said. So let's throw it open to the participant. Ask her questions. Like she said, you can ask directly or even put them in writing. As time permits, I'm sure she'll take all the questions. Please, questions now. It's time for questions. You can write the questions and you can even ask her directly on all that she has said. The issue of damaged reputation because of non-compliance, the criminal liability of it, the risk involved. Ask her any question, I'm sure. She's up to it.
Is question on the chat box, man?
I'm told we have some question on the chat box. Please, can you please check? Questions.
Just posted it.
When I asked a question, I said, if I may ask, that was a question coming from me, that can the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank be attributed to bad governance or bad leadership? I asked that question because I said, I'm sure the very big companies will have advised the leadership on what to do. That can we say they were bad enough in implementing the policies, or what could be the result, or what could have caused the collapse, the entire collapse of the company or of the bank? That was the question from me then.
It was bad leadership. You're spot on, ma'am. It was bad leadership. They knew, from the video also, they knew the right thing to do was not to invest in those kind of stocks and bonds that would take so long, or in mortgages. But they decided that because, it was going to yield more profits. And you know how it is, the more money they bring, especially those of them in management, the more they earn also as profits. Once they declare profits, they are rewarded also. So it was bad leadership. On the part of their board, the board was hardly looking at what executives did. They would come, clap their hands and say, oh, they'll look at the books, we're all in black, oh, fantastic, So they also didn't replace their risk governance chief risk officer. I assume that the man must have been frustrated at some point is why he left. And they probably didn't hire that person, because the first person gave them so much headache, they decided, well, we don't want trouble, please. Let's rest small. Let our head rest small before we hire somebody else. So, but all of those things came back to the leadership. They were the ones taking those decisions. And those decisions ended up, affecting everybody at the end of the day across the world. Mr. Tunde, please unmute yourself. Please, can we unmute Mr. Olatunde Shobowale?
That has been done from his end.
Unmute. Good evening. Can I talk?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm a female though.
Oh, please, sorry, please, Facilitator, let me just chip in a bit. That is the Honorable Justice Olatunde Shobuwale from the Ogun State.
Oh my God. Can I go on, please?
So,
Very nice to meet you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I am wowed. I am wowed. I was just saying, wow, wow, wow here. I want to thank the facilitator so much. I have benefited so much. I want to thank the organizers. I was saying to myself, this should be taken to the National Assembly. It should be taken to Nigeria. We should tell President Tinubu that quarterly, your institute should be given lectures, discuss quarterly to the National Assembly. I think this is going to help Nigeria. National Assembly needs to hear this from time to time. And I am talking seriously. I think somebody needs to take this to Nigeria. I'd like to appreciate you once again. I pray for wisdom for you, the facilitator, and you spoke in clear language. Your communication was perfect. And before you came, His Lordship had introduced you. By the way, you introduced, you mentioned that His Lordship, Shofuwara, you said, Your Honor, that's abroad. In Nigeria, for a magistrate in Lagos, it is Your Honor. In Ogun State, it is Your Worship. But His Lordship, Shofuwara, has just been elevated to the position of a judge. So please, we shouldn't address her as Your Honor, but as Your Lordship.
thank you, my lord. Thank you, my lord.
So concluding, God bless all the organizers. I am wowed. I am wowed. I mean, this has not come as a mistake. When I saw the invite, I had a meeting. I had a meeting for 4 o'clock and yours was for 3. I had to log on. And I came to my boss here at 4 o'clock. I said, please permit me. I am on Zoom. It's so important to me. I took notes down. I have my book here. And honestly speaking, I'm a changed person. God bless you, Mrs. Adiola. I don't know if that's your surname, but God bless you. And God bless the entire ICSA. Is it ICSA?
Yes,
ICSA.
Yes.
Secretary. Please, you're going places. God bless you. I appreciate you. Thank you for the time given to me.
So much, my lord. Thank you for the interest in us. We will take your submission very seriously and take it up.
Please, please. This is awesome. Incredible.
Thank you so much, Ma. And apologies and all corrections duly noted. My sincere apologies. And thank you for forgiving me ahead. Thank you for your very kind words, ma'am. May I continue to take more questions? I see more questions in the chat box. Okay, I see a question here that says, how can a board handle overbearing of a shadow director regarding decisions of the organization? That's a very tricky one, because oftentimes the shadow director, the way it often happens in Nigeria is the shadow director has some sort of money or some sort of interest in the organization that the shadow director does not want disclosed. So a lot of times those kind of shadow directors also are people who have some influence over who becomes a director and who doesn't become a director. So it's a tricky one, but what I usually would advise is that have everything documented in writing. When the shadow director asks you to do certain things, you can deflect by asking a professional. For example, if you have a company secretary, sorry, not the company secretary, because you don't want to put the company secretary in trouble, and you don't want to put in trouble, a board director in trouble, what you can do is to say, oh, the external directors advise that we do this, the external council advise that we do that, and it is in writing. Oftentimes also put those kind of things in writing. When you put things in writing, it forces people to become accountable. The reason why a lot of people are not accountable is because we don't put it in writing. It's not transparent. When it's in writing, you know, they think twice about insisting that you do that thing that you all know to be wrong. Please don't forget that the person on whose head you have the trouble when trouble comes is you. It's your name that is there, not theirs. So you have to find a nice, polite way to ensure that you're doing the right thing politically. So you have to be smart about it. Hopefully that helps. And if anybody else has other suggestions, please put it. I'd like us to all learn together. And the second one is corporate governance not applicable in the government ministries, board, and agencies? What is the way government board, ministries, and agencies can be checkmate or penalized for non-compliance? Corporate governance should actually start from the public sector. Without good corporate governance, we will remain in this rat race and circle. It's the reason why we have corruption. There's no one person that is as powerful as the government. And there is no government that is as powerful as the civil servants that work with them. So it's for us who are members of ICSAN and are in these institutions to ensure that we're doing the right thing. And hopefully we can start to influence them. I know that quite a number of government ministries have codes of conduct, but again, we don't have people who are enforcing them. Enforcement is a big problem in Nigeria. If somebody hits your car in Nigeria, he will come down if he's a reasonable person and say, I take God beg you, I take God beg you. If you say no, people will say, are you God? Abroad, once you hit somebody's car, just give them your insurance. So things work clockwork. You know, you don't need to know anybody, you don't need to see anybody. If we will do those things, the problem we have in Nigeria is Nigerians. As I always say, all these countries that we run to, their government, the economy was built by those citizens. No angel developed America. No Shango, Ogun, Batala. I'm sorry, I'm Yoruba, I only know Yoruba gods. None of them helped to develop India and China. It was the hard work of the people. So if each of us in all of these ministries decide that we want Nigeria to be better, it will be better. And I'd also take the recommendation that perhaps if we could get government involved, then it might help. Maybe at National Assembly and it becomes a law, then maybe it might help. Taking up a first role as Company Secretary for a startup, FinTech, please share some insight and significant steps to ensuring corporate governance and compliance. I would also appreciate a mentoring forum from you. I know ICSAN has a very robust mentoring process, so I'm very sure they'll contact you. If you'd like to contact me as well, I'm a member of the Institute. We're always very happy to share as much as I know. So please, my contact details is in the slides. And again, I'm on LinkedIn, so we can take it from there. And some insights and significant steps. So it depends on, so the company is a startup. I'd advise and I would say that this is the best time to start corporate governance. Take up, because you're taking up the role as company secretary, first and foremost, realize and take up the role as somebody who is influential in the company. Let them know that you know your job. Again, it comes back to what I advised earlier. If they don't want to listen to you, you are not the director, you are company secretary, your role is to advise, don't fight, put it in writing. If it becomes a case of they're not listening, they're not following processes, and you feel it might affect you professionally, please, I beg you, try and find another job. But if it's not something that is impacting to your professional life, stay there. It takes time to make changes. It's not easy for people to make changes, especially when you are working closely with a founder. But as you increase your influence within the organization, they will start to take what you say. Sometimes increasing that influence can mean take a step back, let them get in trouble. When they get in trouble and they have paid somebody money or lost money, the next time you talk, they'll listen to you. Trust me, that's from experience. I hope that helped. The Financial Reporting Council is also developing a code for corporate. Fantastic, yes, fantastic. So I hope that happens. I think those are all the questions. Hopefully I haven't missed anybody's questions. And I'll now mute my mic. Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much for this very warm welcome.
And finally, there are no other questions. Are we through with the questions? Are we through with the questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, on the chat.
We have some on the chat. Please, can you just read?
No more. We don't have any more on the chat. And no raised hands. So I believe that we're done. All
right. So before rounding up very finally, I'd like to call on the vice chairman of the chapter. That's the Ogun State chapter, in the person of Mr. Taiwo Raji. Mr. Taiwo Raji is not only a member of this, he's also a member of ICANN. So he has a lot of experience. But for now, it's just to help us to say a huge thank you to our very able facilitator. She has actually done a good job. And like Milord said, we are ready to take this up. We'll put up a write-up after the program and then follow it up. And I'm sure that will be resolved. So please be ready. We may need to call on you again to follow us to Abuja. Mr. Raji. Mr. Raji.
Hello, ma. Good afternoon, everybody.
Yes.
It is a privilege for me to be on this platform as the vice chairman of Abeokuta chapter, and of Ogun State chapter rather. I would rather say, hello, ma. I would rather say this is a wonderful experience that we have experienced with Mrs. Olumeyo. You have really done a good job for us. When we started this project, it was more or less like, will it be possible for us, a new chapter for that matter, that is trying to make a mark within the great boundary of ICSA. We really thank you for pulling this through for us. And I will say this is the beginning for Abeokuta, for Ogun State chapter. We shall call on you in very recent, in the immediate future, to come and do better things for us in Ogun State. Thank you, ma.
Well, so far, so good. We have finally come to the end of this program. Thank you to all our participants. Thank you again, the facilitator. God bless us all as we do everything possible to ensure that Nigeria is a better country. Thank you very much.